Welcome back. We're also welcoming back our next speaker, who is Dr. Perry Bell. Dr. Bell is a psychologist for children and adolescents, and we're going to pick his brain today about sports. So welcome back, Dr. Bell.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's nice to be back.
Oh, yes. So Dr. Bell, we chatted before our interview a little bit about how you can use SEL learning, or the social emotional learning, within sports. And we also talked about how even though they're younger kids, a lot of parents do have their children in sports. So can you tell us a little bit about how SEL does apply to the sports world for us?
Absolutely. Sports in so many ways are a great microcosm for teaching social emotional learning skills. And within the context of a game or a season, in being a part of a team, you learn how to manage so many important relationships and feelings. And I want to start off by talking about resilience. I think that resilience is really one of the most important skills that you can learn in sports. And when I say resilience, what I mean is the ability to bounce back from failure. Very often children have a hard time with failure because it becomes an indictment on their capacity. So I want to first start off by sharing that there's a concept that you may be familiar with, and it's big in educational circles, and it's being applied also to the athletic context, which is something called growth mindset. So growth mindset is a term that was coined by a professor who wrote a book called Mindset, and in her book she discusses how people fall into two categories. We either respond to challenge with a fixed mindset or with a growth mindset. A fixed mindset is to say, if let's say you're up to bat and you swing and you strike out, you feel like, you know what, I'm just not good at baseball. Now, if that's your attribution to your failure, you're probably not going to try harder next time. You're going to feel so badly about yourself. It's going to be hard to get up to bat again. Contrast that with a kid who, when they swing and they miss, they say, you know what? I think I swung too early. Or, I shouldn't have swung at that pitch. A kid who looks at the situation as an opportunity for growth and looks at failure as an opportunity to do better, those children are more resilient generally because they approach failure not as an indictment on their ability, but as an opportunity to learn and to improve. Michael Jordan has a great quote. He says, the reason I'm so successful is because of all my failures. And I often talk to kids about that quote because I think that, Michael Jordan in many circles is known to be this athlete able to perform under the greatest pressure for the greatest amount of time. And he sort of, people think about him as the ultimate athlete. And for him, it wasn't about, okay, I was just born this way. He makes it very clear he wouldn't have achieved if he didn't have the capacity to tolerate failure. So to bring it back around, I think one of the most important pieces of sports that something a child can take away from their athletic experiences is this exact trait, which is learning how to respond to failure with curiosity, with potential for growth, and understanding that it's in the repetition that we become successful.
That's really neat. Yeah, I could see how somebody would, if you were a child that was trying something, they would see that that limit on themselves if they hadn't been taught how to do that, how to look beyond the one quote unquote failure and see it as progress. So how do you teach kids how to do this then?
Right, a great question. So you want to teach them first of all, I think coaches need to be equipped with this knowledge. Coaches are literally on the field. They're the ones who can help children navigate this. And it happens to be that I used to be a high school basketball coach, and this is something I would talk to my players about. When a child, we want to make sure deliberately that when a child is playing a sport and they're learning from the ground up, that they approach each repetition as a part of the learning process. I think right now with youth sports, kids are typically playing on multiple teams, across multiple seasons, which wasn't always the case. There's a level of competition that is a little bit different today than it was 20 years ago. And with that comes performance anxiety. And kids need to understand that when they do have a failure, they should label the feeling and say, okay, here's the feeling I'm having. And what does this feeling mean? So it's how we interpret the feeling that matters. We're all going to feel upset when we strike out. The question is do we say to ourselves, oh, that upset is telling me I need to try harder next time and do something different? Or is that upset saying, I need to try soccer? So we want to sort of help children make the attribution of their feeling and then learn to do something with it tangibly.
So what if, as a parent, I maybe unintentionally put a lot of pressure on my child by asking how things went? So maybe it's, how did you feel about the game? How did coach say, what did he say about your game? Was it something that he liked? I think we all want to have, as parents, a little bit of validation that our time and effort of putting our child into that sport is worth it. But is that too much for them? I guess is part of my question.
Well, I think, sports really, they're supposed to be fun. And I think for many kids, it loses the sense of fun, as they climb in the ranks in terms of competition. And so we have to be mindful, where our children are at with some of this stuff. Some kids, it's their ticket to college. And I've worked with many kids where that is the case. And often I've brought up to parents and kids a conversation that they aren't necessarily coming to me with and about, which is to say, is this worth it? Have we crossed the threshold into this is beneficial for you, and now this is just harming you? And that's really a question that we talk about with sports, but it's really a question we talk about with really anything in life, which is the awareness of what's effective and what isn't in terms of our mental health. We're asking children to be professional athletes at 12 years old when they have the brains of 12-year-old children. They're not 25, 26, 27 with the brain maturation of somebody that age and with the life experience to understand how to deal with these things. So we're putting expectations on children that far exceed their capacity. So if you notice when you talk to children, if parents notice when they talk to their children that this is happening, it's important to recontextualize the whole experience of why we're playing sports and what it's about, and also to help them label their own thoughts and feelings in the moment so that they're not sort of spiraling into directions that are just not helpful for them.
Well, let's flip it and say, what if the coach is someone who doesn't understand the SEL process and is putting a lot of pressure? Would you say the same thing to the kids and how to handle that?
So that's more challenging. Absolutely. I mean, of course, the first line of defense would be, we need to teach this coach, how to coach a little bit differently, which isn't to say there isn't something to be said for the old school mentality of pushing, pushing, pushing. That's okay. I found, at least in my experience playing competitive sports, I had coaches like that. Again, they did it in the context of growth. You messed up, you could do better next time, put in more. If you weren't putting in the effort, that was a different conversation. But coaches need to understand that they actually hurt a child's self-esteem, if they're not approaching it properly. So your question is, what if a coach is acting this way with towards their players? What do we do about that? Right. How does a child cope with that? So it's important that the child is able to hear what the coach says and label it as, these are my coach's feelings. They're not necessarily accurate. They don't necessarily reflect how I'm doing. That's a very important emotional intelligence skill to recognize that, oftentimes if somebody's upset, we take on their feelings. We feel what they feel. Kids have a tendency to do that because they, as we spoke about last time, don't necessarily have the language to understand what's going on. So to help a child say, okay, that's my coach. They're emotional right now. It's not necessarily what's reflected in my own play, and I don't have to feel that way. So make that separation.
So really, when it comes down to it, that goes back to our first conversation about emotional intelligence and having the parents really work on that and help the kid to understand what they're really feeling and what their motives are internally.
Right, absolutely.
Very good. Well, I know that we're limited on time here. Do you have any last suggestions for parents as far as sports and SEL or just handling their kids' emotions in sports?
I think the most important point here is resilience, to make sure that we're teaching children that when they mess up or they fail, it's an opportunity for growth rather than emblematic of their ability. And I think the more we can reinforce that in children in sports, the easier it'll be for them and the more they'll be able to gain the important lessons that they can from sports.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bell. You are just a wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate your time doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.